What makes a villain truly unforgettable? Their actions or their silence? In the golden age of Hollywood, the scariest characters weren't always the ones waving a gun or shouting threats. Sometimes, the most chilling figures were those who smiled, sat still, or quietly let destruction unfold. These weren't your typical villains. They were unsettling because they broke expectations, twisting ideas of loyalty, motherhood, or even innocence into something terrifying. Today, we're diving into some of the most disturbing performances of Hollywood's classic-era characters who redefined what it meant to be truly sinister. Bette Davis, as Regina Giddens, The Little Foxes, 1941. Imagine sitting in a room while someone you love or claim to love struggles for their life, and you just watch. That's exactly what Bette Davis did on screen in The Little Foxes. As Regina Giddens, she embodied a villain who didn't have to lift a hand to destroy someone. In one of cinema's most debated scenes, her husband suffers a fatal heart attack right in front of her, and she refuses to move. No screaming, no attempt to call for help, just cold, deliberate stillness. Audiences in the 1942nd weren't prepared for a woman like Regina. Female characters were expected to comfort, to heal, to bring warmth. Davis flipped that expectation upside down. She was polished, poised, and terrifying precisely because she was indifferent. Director William Wyler reportedly wanted more dramatic emotion in the role, but Davis pushed back. She believed the power of Regina came not from hysteria, but from restraint. Historians argue that creative clash gave the character her sharp edge. The role earned Davis an Academy Award nomination, and critics praised her brilliance. But it wasn't admiration audiences walked away with. It was unease. Here was a woman who didn't need weapons or schemes. Her weapon was silence, and it left moviegoers rattled. But Davis wasn't the only actress of the era to terrify audiences with icy control. Just a year earlier, another woman took obsession to disturbing heights. Judith Anderson as Mrs. Danvers, Rebecca, 1940. Few characters in film history are as quietly haunting as Mrs. Danvers in Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. Played by Judith Anderson, she wasn't violent, she wasn't loud. She was simply unwavering, manipulative, and obsessed, and that was enough to send shivers down spines. Mrs. Danvers wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the keeper of memory, fiercely loyal to the deceased Rebecca. Her fixation on her former mistress blurred the line between devotion and something darker. Critics at the time noted her subtle menace, and scholars have since debated whether her obsession was an early example of queer coding in Hollywood, a reading that persists today, even though Hitchcock never confirmed it. Anderson's performance earned her an Academy Award nomination, an unusual recognition for a character who terrorized not with knives, but with whispers. Rumors circulated that she kept emotional distance from her co-stars during filming, staying icy between takes to preserve the character's presence. Whether true or not, it fed into the myth of Mrs. Danvers as one of cinema's most unnerving figures. Hitchcock's vision amplified it further. Her severe wardrobe, her shadowy movements, her tendency to linger just a little too long, it all made her feel tethered to Rebecca's ghost. To audiences, she wasn't just creepy, she was suffocating. If Mrs. Danvers showed how obsession corrodes the soul, another woman of the Golden Age horrified audiences by weaponizing the most sacred bond of all family. Angela Lansbury as Eleanor Iselin, The Manchurian Candidate, 1962. Angela Lansbury is best remembered for her warmth on Murder, She Wrote, but in 1962, she terrified the world as Eleanor Iselin in The Manchurian Candidate. She didn't play a monster in the shadows. She played a mother, and that's what made her performance so disturbing. Eleanor wasn't nurturing. She was manipulative, cold, and calculating, molding her own son into a political assassin. The age difference between Lansbury and Lawrence Harvey, who played her son, was barely 3 years. Yet their dynamic was written with an unsettling intimacy that disturbed audiences. Her control was so absolute, it felt unnatural, like motherhood twisted into something predatory. Lansbury's performance was chillingly precise, and it earned her an Oscar nomination. But the role became even more infamous after real life collided with fiction. Just a year after the film's release, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. At Frank Sinatra's request, the film was pulled from circulation, reportedly out of respect, though some whisper it was, because the parallels hit too close to home. Decades later, Eleanor Iselin is still regarded as one of cinema's most chilling maternal villains. She didn't just manipulate politics, she manipulated blood ties. But villains didn't always lurk in family dynamics. Sometimes they hid in plain sight, disguised as loyal companions. Erich von Stroheim as Max von Mayerling, Sunset Boulevard, 1950. In Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, the character of Max von Mayerling unnerved audiences not with aggression, but with compliance. Played by Erich von Stroheim, Max was more than just a butler. He was Norma Desmond's ex-husband, her former director, and the architect of her fantasy world. His loyalty wasn't admirable, it was chilling. Max wrote fake fan letters to Norma. He managed her routines like a director on a film set. He shielded her from reality as she slipped deeper into delusion. His silence and service weren't just unsettling, they were dangerous. What made Max even more disturbing was the eerie overlap with von Stroheim's own career. Once a respected silent film director, his masterpiece Greed was famously butchered by MGM, destroying his directing trajectory. Casting him as Max, a man quietly living in the ruins of a faded career, was like casting a ghost. Film historians say it blurred the line between fiction and reality, making Max's loyalty feel less like devotion and more like entrapment. Audiences didn't despise him for what he did. They despised what he represented, the silent enablers, who keep illusions alive long past their expiration date. And if Max embodied loyalty gone too far, Lionel Barrymore's Mr. Potter represented cold ambition without limits. Lionel Barrymore as Mr. Potter, It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. Christmas classics usually come with warm lessons and moral victories, but in It's a Wonderful Life, Lionel Barrymore's Mr. Potter was anything but festive. As a ruthless banker, he hoarded wealth, exploited power, and when given the chance to save George Bailey with $8,000, he coldly refused. Audiences recoiled at his cruelty, but what disturbed them most was the lack of justice. Mr. Potter faced no punishment, no arrest, no downfall. He simply faded into the background, greed intact. Critics still argue whether this was a narrative oversight or Frank Capra's bold commentary on corruption in America. Either way, it left a bitter aftertaste in an otherwise uplifting film. Off-screen, Barrymore was known for philanthropy and kindness, which made his cold, clipped delivery as Potter even more powerful. He leaned into the villainy, reportedly enjoying how much audiences hated him. Today, Potter is shorthand for greed without conscience, a holiday villain who didn't need ghosts, chains, or redemption arcs, just a bottomless appetite for control. While Potter's villainy was rooted in greed, other Golden Age characters horrified by turning love into obsession. Jean Tierney as Ellen Barrett, Leave Her to Heaven, 1945. Jean Tierney's Ellen Barrett looked like the perfect wife, elegant, radiant, poised. But beneath the beauty was a cruelty so cold, it left audiences gasping. In one of the most shocking scenes of mid-century cinema, Ellen watches as her husband's disabled younger brother struggles in the water and refuses to help. She lets him drown, her face serene. What made Ellen terrifying wasn't chaos or rage. It was how calm she was. She wasn't unhinged. She was calculating. Tierney played her with a restraint that critics described as mesmerizing and deeply disturbing. The Academy nominated Tierney for Best Actress, acknowledging a performance that reinvented the femme fatale archetype. Ellen wasn't seductive in smoky noir shadows. She was radiant in technicolor, framed by lakes and sunlit estates. That contrast violence in beauty made her unforgettable. Some studio executives reportedly feared audiences would reject such an unapologetic female villain, but they didn't. Ellen Barrett became one of the most infamous anti-heroines of her time. And while Ellen weaponized love, Barbara Stanwyck's Leona Stevenson weaponized vulnerability itself. Barbara Stanwyck as Leona Stevenson, Sorry, Wrong Number, 1948. Barbara Stanwyck was no stranger to playing complex women, but as Leona Stevenson in Sorry, Wrong Number, she took it to another level. Confined to a bed, suffering from a chronic illness, Leona should have been sympathetic. Instead, she became one of the most manipulative characters of the era. Leona used her illness to control those around her, exploiting pity as a weapon. The entire film unfolded in her lavish Manhattan apartment, with the telephone becoming her lifeline and her downfall. Director Anatol Litvak turned the claustrophobic setting into a trap, making the phone itself feel like an accomplice to her unraveling. Critics were divided. Some saw her eventual fate as fitting retribution, while others argued it was a tragic collapse of a woman consumed by control. Either way, audiences weren't used to seeing a female lead portrayed with such cold viciousness. Stanwyck's performance earned her an Oscar nomination, but it also left a mark. Leona wasn't forgiven. She wasn't redeemed. She was undone by the very power she tried to wield. But villains in this era weren't always schemers. Some were addicts, some were children, and some were journalists willing to sell their soul for a headline. The wild cards, rapid-fire villains. Ray Milland as Don Burnham, The Lost Weekend, 1945. Addiction turned into horror. Burnham wasn't a traditional villain, but his lies, manipulation, and desperate hallucinations made him disturbingly human. His story shocked audiences by showing alcoholism without glamour, just ruin. Patty McCormack as Rhoda Penmark, The Bad Seed, 1956. An angelic-looking child hiding a murderous streak. Audiences were horrified at the idea of inherited evil. Censors demanded Rhoda be struck down by lightning as punishment, but her impact was already made. She shattered the idea of childhood innocence. Kirk Douglas as Chuck Tatum, Ace in the Hole, 1951. A journalist who exploited tragedy for fame, manipulating a rescue effort to build a media circus. Too cynical for its time, the film flopped, but today, Tatum feels like a warning about modern media culture. Clifton Webb as Waldo Lydecker, Laura, 1944. Sophisticated, charming, and obsessive, he murdered not out of passion, but control. His polished exterior hid a sociopath, making him one of the most elegantly terrifying figures of classic cinema. Conclusion: these characters proved that a villain doesn't need weapons or explosions to terrify. Sometimes the most unsettling figures are the ones who sit silently, smile sweetly, or whisper their way into control. From manipulative mothers to predatory journalists, they broke the mold of the traditional villain, showing us that evil can wear many faces, refined, charming, even innocent. And maybe that's why they still haunt us. Because deep down, they don't feel like characters. They feel real. So, which of these chilling performances disturbed you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story from Hollywood's darker side.